from hunting, gathering to growing food. Now let's look at Tussar's train journey. So Tushar was going from Delhi to Chennai for his cousin's wedding. They were traveling by train, and he had managed to squeeze into the window seat, his nose glued to the glass pane. As he watched trees and houses fly past, his uncle tapped on his shoulder and said, "Do you know that trains were first used about 150 years ago, and that people began uses buses a few decades later?" Tushar wondered, when people couldn't travel quickly from one place to another, did they spend their entire lives wherever they were born? Not quite. The earliest people, why were they on the move? Now we know about the people who lived in the subcontinent as early as 2 million years ago. Today, we describe them as hunter gatherers. The name comes from the way in which they got their food. Generally, they hunted animals, wild animals, caught fish and birds, gathered fruits, roots, nuts, seeds, leaves, stalks, and eggs. Hunter gatherers moved from place to place. There are many reasons for this. First, if they had stayed at one place for a long time, they would have eaten up all the available plant and animal resources. Therefore, they would have had to go elsewhere in search of food. Second, animals move from place to place, either in search of smaller prey or, in the case of deer and wildlife, in search of grass and leaves. That is why those who hunted them had to follow their movements. Third, plants and trees bear fruit in different seasons. So people may have moved from season to season in search of different kinds of plants. Fourth, people, plants, and animals need water to survive. Water is found in lakes, streams, and rivers. While many rivers and lakes are perennial, with water throughout the year, others are seasonal. People living on the banks would have had to go in the search of water during the dry seasons, winter and summer. How do we know about these people? Archaeologists have found some of the things hunter gatherers made and used. It is likely that people made and used tools of stone, wood, and bone, of which stone tools have survived the best. Some of these stone tools were used to cut meat and bone, scrape bark from trees and hides from animal skins, chop fruits and roots. Some may have been attached to handles of bone or wood to make spears and arrows for hunting. Other tools were used to chop wood, which was used as a firewood. Wood was also used to make huts and tools. Now here are just some examples of stone tools that have may been used for digging the ground to collect edible roots, like is shown over here, or stitching clothes that are made out of animal skin. Now, as stone tools were important, people tried to find places where good quality stone was easily available. Now, Bhimbetka in present-day Madhya Pradesh. This is an old site with caves and rock shelters. People choose those natural caves because they provided shelter from the rain, heat, and wind. These rock shelters are close to the Narmada Valley. Now, question for you is, can you think why the people choose to live there? So this is the picture of the Bhimbetka place that we discussed earlier. Now, here is an example. This is a painting that you can see from a rock shelter. Can you describe what is being shown in the painting? It's fairly obvious. Now, many of the caves in which these early people lived have paintings on the walls. Some of the best examples are from Madhya Pradesh and southern Uttar Pradesh. These paintings show wild animals drawn with great accuracy and skill. Now, let's look at the impact of a changing environment. So around 12,000 years ago, there were major changes in the climate of the world, with a shift to relatively warm conditions. In many areas, this led to the development of grasslands. This in turn led to an increase in the number of deer, antelope, goat, sheep, and cattle, that is, animals that survived on grass. Those who hunted these animals now followed them, learning about their food habits and their breeding seasons. It is likely that this helped people to start thinking about herding and rearing these animals themselves. Fishing also became important, and this marks the beginning of the farming and herding. This was also a time when several grain bearing grasses, including wheat, barley, and rice, grew naturally in different parts of the subcontinent. Men and women and children probably collected these grains as food and learned where they grew and when they ripened. This may have led them to think about growing plants on their own. In this way, people became farmers. People could also attract and then tame animals. By leaving food for them near their shelters, the first animal to be tamed was the wild ancestor of the dog. Later, people encouraged animals that were relatively gentle to come near to the camps where they lived. These animals, such as sheep, goat, and cattle, and also the pig, lived in herds and most of them ate grass. Often, people protected these animals from the attacks by other wild animals, and this is how they became herders. Now, can you think of any reasons why the dog was perhaps the first animal to be tamed? As the grain had to be stored for both food and seed, people had to think of ways of storing it. In many areas, people began making large clay pots or wove baskets or dug pits into the ground. So, do you think that the hunter gatherers would have made and used pots? Give reasons for your answer. Now, let's look at the concept of storing animals. Animals multiply naturally. Besides, if they are looked after carefully, they provide milk, which is an important source of food and meat, whenever required. In other words, animals that are reared can be used as a store of food. So, apart from food, what are the other things that could have been obtained from animals? And what are the animals used for today?